What if the key to understanding one of the world's most misunderstood civilizations lay buried beneath layers of fear, misunderstanding, and silence? What if a ritual so intense, so dark, and so spiritually complex has been misunderstood for centuries because we've been too afraid to truly see what it meant, not just for the Aztecs, but for the cosmos itself? The Aztec Empire, known for its military might, engineering prowess, and astronomical insight, has long stood at the center of fascination and controversy. Among its many rituals, there is one that modern scholars, archaeologists, and spiritual historians still cannot fully explain. A rite so shrouded in mystery and purpose that even today it echoes with unanswered questions. This was no mere bloodletting or symbolic ceremony. This was the ritual known as the feeding of the sun, where captives were sacrificed in a carefully calculated act meant to nourish the cosmos and ensure the survival of the world itself. But this was not a mindless act of violence. It was a conversation with the gods, a poetic exchange of life for light, pain for continuity. To understand this ritual, we must first understand the Aztec worldview. Unlike modern secular thought, the Aztecs believed that time itself was fragile, constantly in danger of collapsing into chaos. The universe was not a self-sustaining machine. It was a living being, and it required nourishment. Every sunrise was a miracle bought with sacrifice. Every successful harvest, every rainstorm, every stable day of life was a direct result of pleasing the gods who held the heavens aloft. Chief among these gods was Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, who demanded strength and blood to rise again each day. Without proper tribute, the sun might not return, and the fifth age, the world in which the Aztecs lived, could come to a sudden, catastrophic end. But to think of this ritual simply as an act of fear misses the heart of it. The Aztecs were not cowards cowering before cruel gods. They were poets of the soul, deeply immersed in a cosmology where death was not an end, but a sacred transformation. To be chosen for sacrifice was not punishment, it was an honor. The victims, often warriors captured in ritual combat, were given months of care, clothed in finery, and treated as guests of the empire. They were not simply killed, they were elevated, purified, and prepared for a journey into divinity. The ceremony itself was filled with songs, dances, and offerings, acts of beauty amid the terror. And when the moment came, it was performed with precision, with a priest whose duty was not cruelty but sacred responsibility. The ritual site, the Templo Mayor, was a sacred mountain in the heart of Tenochtitlan. Rising from the center of a floating city on Lake Texcoco, it symbolized the axis mundi, the point of connection between the earthly realm and the divine. Here, amid the incense, the flowers, the chanting, and the people, this is where the sacrifice took place. The heart, still beating, was offered to the sun. Blood spilled on the steps, not as a sign of horror, but as a gift. Life returning to the cosmos. What we see as brutality, the Aztecs saw as harmony. What we call a nightmare, they called a covenant. But what made this ritual different from others, what gives it the title darkest, was not just the physical act, but the metaphysical implications. There are records, few but chilling, of a variation of the ritual involving the flaying of the victim and the wearing of the skin by a priest or designated person. This act was part of the festival of Tlacaxipehualistli, dedicated to Saipe Totec, the god of spring, fertility, and renewal. The flayed skin represented the old season, shed so that new life could emerge. In this context, wearing the skin was not grotesque, it was symbolic resurrection, rebirth through the cycle of death. Yet, this is the part that still leaves modern minds reeling. Why such intensity? Why such a visual and visceral form of transformation? Perhaps the answer lies in the Aztecs' deep understanding of duality. Light and dark, life and death, joy and pain. None existed without the other. For the Aztecs, to deny the reality of suffering was to deny the reality of existence. They embraced both, not as opposites, but as complements. In sacrificing a human life, they were not destroying humanity. They were reaffirming it on a cosmic scale. This worldview was so alien to the Spanish conquistadors that upon encountering it, they could only respond with violence and condemnation. To them, the ritual was demonic, but they misunderstood it completely. They could not see the layers of myth, sacrifice, and spiritual logic beneath the surface. And so, the ritual was silenced. The altars were torn down, the priests executed, the codices burned. But the memory remained. It pulsed beneath the concrete of Mexico City, in the Nahuatl words whispered from generation to generation. And even today, archaeologists uncover more questions than answers. Was the darkest ritual truly understood by those who performed it? Or was it an inherited mystery, kept alive because it worked, because the sun kept rising, the rain kept falling, and the people kept surviving? There are scholars who argue that the ritual was a form of mass psychological control, that it instilled fear and obedience. But this theory fails to capture the sacred. It reduces a civilization's entire spiritual framework to politics and power. The Aztecs were many things: strategists, yes, but also artists, dreamers, and seekers of truth in the stars. Their rituals were not just about dominance. They were about maintaining the cosmic order, fulfilling a sacred debt that was older than the empire itself. As we continue this journey, we must be willing to leave our modern assumptions behind. We must try to see the ritual not through the lens of horror, but through the lens of understanding. The darkest ritual we still can't explain may not be dark at all, not in the way we think. It may be a mirror, reflecting our own discomfort with the sacred and the unknown. Perhaps, by exploring it further, we don't just uncover the truth of the Aztecs. We uncover something about ourselves. Before we dive deeper into the ceremony itself, its symbols, participants, and layers of meaning, take a moment to reflect. What does sacrifice mean to you? Is it loss? Or is it a form of offering, of deep cosmic connection that our world has forgotten? Comment below with your thoughts. Does this ritual feel horrifying, poetic, or both? And what part of Aztec culture are you most curious about? Their astronomy, their gods, or the secrets buried in stone? To truly understand the depth of this enigmatic ritual, we must now step into the temple courtyard, not as horrified observers, but as respectful witnesses seeking clarity rather than condemnation. The ritual we continue to explore was not born in madness or cruelty, but in cosmological necessity. The Aztecs lived in a universe that demanded participation. For them, the gods had once sacrificed themselves so that humanity might live. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, had bled into the earth to create the first people. In return, humanity owed a blood debt, not just to honor the gods, but to sustain the rhythm of existence itself. This wasn't belief. It was certainty, reinforced by centuries of tradition and prophecy, carved into stone and sung in the Nahuatl language by priests at dawn. Within the great Templo Mayor, two main deities received tribute: Tlaloc, god of rain, and Huitzilopochtli, god of sun and war. Their twin temples crowned the sacred pyramid, each facing a cardinal direction. On days of major ceremonies, thousands gathered to witness the sacrifices offered to ensure rain for the crops and sunlight for survival. The timing was not arbitrary. Aztec priests were expert astronomers, aligning their ceremonies with solar cycles, equinoxes, and movements of Venus. To them, the ritual was not a primitive spectacle. It was the fulfillment of celestial duty. To miss a cycle, or offer improperly, could unravel everything. The ceremony began long before the altar was reached. Victims, often prisoners of war, but sometimes selected volunteers, were prepared with months of ritual purification. They were bathed, adorned with flowers, feathers, and jewels, and often treated as living embodiments of the gods they would honor in death. These individuals were not dragged unwillingly. Many walked with dignity, knowing they were chosen for something far greater than themselves. In the Aztec moral universe, their death was not meaningless. It was transcendence. Their names would be remembered. Their spirits would rise with the sun. The music of flutes and drums echoed across the temple steps as the ritual unfolded. Dancers, dressed in vibrant regalia, moved in patterns that mimicked the cosmos. Incense rose like smoke signals to the heavens, while the people chanted prayers to call down divine attention. When the moment of sacrifice arrived, the high priest, trained from childhood in the arts of ritual and sacred time, would raise a ceremonial blade of obsidian, its edges sharper than steel. With practiced precision, he would open the chest and offer the still-beating heart to the sky. The blood would run down the temple steps, not as mere gore, but as holy fluid nourishing the gods, ensuring balance, continuation, and cosmic favor. To our eyes, this might appear brutal, but within the Aztec frame, it was beauty, a culmination of sacred drama, the merging of human life with the divine will. Even the body was not discarded carelessly. Depending on the ceremony, the remains were either buried with honors or, in specific festivals, used in secondary rituals that symbolized fertility, renewal, or celestial cycles. One of these was the festival of Totec, the flayed god whose worship required an act so profound that it remains, to this day, one of the least understood practices in the entire Aztec canon. During Tlacoxipi-Hualistli, warriors captured in ritual combat were not only sacrificed, but their skins were worn by designated priests or warriors for several days. These skins, treated as sacred garments, were symbols of rebirth. They represented the old layer of life, sloughed off like bark from a tree, allowing new life to emerge. Wearing the skin was not a grotesque act. It was seen as becoming the god himself. The transformation was not only symbolic, but spiritual. The priest entered a state of divine imitation, carrying the presence of Totec among the people. This walking embodiment was believed to bring blessings to the land, fertility to the crops, and healing to the sick. Villagers would touch the skin, not in revulsion, but in reverence. Still, the question lingers. Why such intensity? Why a ritual that so viscerally connects flesh, spirit, and nature? The answer may lie in the Aztecs' unique concept of teotl, a Nahuatl word that described the sacred energy flowing through all things. Everything, from stone to fire to blood, contained teotl. But teotl had to be kept in motion. It was dynamic, not static. Without regular renewal through sacrifice and ritual, teotl could fade, causing imbalances, illness, or natural disasters. In this worldview, the darkest ritual we still can't explain was not darkness at all. It was a brilliant, if terrifying, articulation of divine physics. From this perspective, the heart offering, the flaying, the celestial timing, and the prayers were all part of a deeply interconnected system. Each act resonated through time and space. To the Aztecs, their rituals were not just internal affairs, they were conversations with the stars, negotiations with death, affirmations of their place in the sacred chain of existence. Every drop of blood was a word. Every heartbeat offered was a chant in the great cosmic liturgy. What makes this ritual even more haunting is that it was performed with absolute sincerity. There was no illusion, no pretense. The Aztecs did not see themselves as villains or executioners. They saw themselves as guardians of balance, as stewards of a delicate world that could collapse if even one part went wrong. This was not psychopathy. It was conviction, a belief system built not just on fear, but on devotion, honor, and celestial logic. Many have attempted to rationalize the ritual through modern lenses, calling it statecraft, social control, or propaganda. And yes, those elements existed. Empire is never innocent. But reducing the ritual to power politics alone strips it of its soul. It was, at its core, a ritual of offering, a dialogue between the mortal and the divine. And that is why, even after the destruction of the Aztec temples and the burning of their sacred books, the ritual still speaks to us. We do not fully understand it, not because the facts are missing, but because the mindset is so radically different from our own. And yet, the ritual continues to resurface in stone carvings unearthed from beneath modern Mexico City, in indigenous festivals that blend Christian saints with ancient deities, and in the whispered stories passed down through generations. Even today, some descendants of the Mexica people perform symbolic versions of the rites, not with violence, but with dance, song, and offerings of maize and flowers. They remember, they honor, and they challenge us to look again, not with fear, but with curiosity. As we move forward in this journey, we will peel back more layers, exploring the roles of the priesthood, the architecture of sacred space, and the cosmological texts that guided each step. But for now, we must sit with what we've seen, not as judges, but as students. The darkest ritual we still can't explain may, in truth, be a light shining on a forgotten way of being, where sacrifice was sacred, death was meaningful, and the divine was never far away. As we delve deeper into the heart of the ritual that still confounds modern understanding, it becomes essential to turn our attention to those who stood at its center, not the victims, nor the crowd, but the priests who orchestrated this sacred exchange. The Aztec priesthood was not a random assembly of powerful men cloaked in mystery. It was an institution of knowledge, discipline, and profound spiritual training. From a young age, future priests were chosen and immersed in years of rigorous preparation. They learned the sacred calendar, studied the stars, memorized the codices, fasted, purified themselves, and were taught to read omens in wind, fire, and shadow. To be a priest was to be the living bridge between human life and divine will, a custodian of sacred equilibrium. These were not figures of cruelty. They were vessels of cosmic upper order. When they performed a sacrifice, it was done with trembling reverence and spiritual responsibility, not with detachment or sadism. They believed with all their being that every act they committed was necessary for the balance of life itself. Much of their sacred planning revolved around the Tonalpohualli, the Aztec ritual calendar of 260 days, composed of 20 signs and 13 numbers. It was not merely a way to measure time, but a living matrix, a tool to determine the energy of each day, the appropriate deity to honor, and the types of rituals needed to maintain universal balance. Each day had its own patron god, its own destiny, its own character. Time for the Aztecs was not linear, but cyclical, always returning, always echoing. The priests read this calendar the way others might read a sacred text or interpret a prophetic vision. When the darkest rituals were performed, they were not chosen arbitrarily. They were aligned with powerful dates that corresponded with eclipses, solstices, or conjunctions of celestial bodies. In their eyes, the ritual was never simply performed. It was invoked, as if the very universe had requested it. To assist in these sacred tasks, the priests relied on the codices, painted books made of deerskin or bark paper that recorded histories, myths, rituals, and astronomical data. Though most of these were tragically destroyed during the Spanish conquest, the few that survive today, such as the Codex Borgia, offer glimpses into the profound complexity of Aztec ritual practice. Within their intricate symbols and vibrant images lie instructions for ceremonies, descriptions of gods, and cycles of cosmic renewal. These texts were not merely religious. They were technical, philosophical, and spiritual all at once. A priest interpreting these codices was acting as both scientist and sage, engaging with a worldview in which every human action had cosmic consequences. This is why the darkest ritual, so bloody to the modern eye, was anything but random. It was choreographed down to the hour, the heartbeat, the breath, and it was done not with malice, but with the sacred intention of preserving creation. At the core of these rituals was a belief that the gods themselves had modeled sacrifice. According to Aztec mythology, before the world as we know it came into being, the gods convened at Teotihuacan to decide who would become the new sun. One god, proud and powerful, stepped forward, but failed. Another, humble and disfigured, leapt into the flames without hesitation. That god, Nanahuatzin, was transformed into the sun, but it would not move. Only when the other gods sacrificed themselves did the sun begin to travel across the sky. From that moment forward, life itself depended on sacrificial offerings. The Aztecs did not invent sacrifice. They inherited it from the gods. And in honoring that origin story, they saw themselves not as inventors of death, but participants in a divine cycle. This myth was reenacted in every major ritual. Every sacrifice was a retelling, a reignition of the cosmic fire. The rituals were also deeply theatrical. They involved elaborate costumes, masks, and symbolic acts that blurred the line between myth and reality. In some ceremonies, the sacrificial victim would be dressed as a god, particularly Tezcatlipoca, the god of night, sorcery, and fate. For a year, he would live as a divine figure, walking the streets in luxury, granted all pleasures, treated as a living deity. On the appointed day, he would climb the steps of the temple, break his flute along the way, a gesture that signaled the end of his worldly joy, and submit himself willingly to the blade. This was not simply sacrifice. It was divine drama, cosmic theater that reified the myths and made the people feel part of something eternal. Even as blood was shed, the ritual was enveloped in beauty, flowers, chants, perfume, music. The sensory overload was not to mask the violence, but to elevate it into transcendence. Of course, not all victims went to the gods by choice. While many were honored warriors taken in battle, others were slaves, purchased for the express purpose of sacrifice. This opens a painful dimension of the practice that cannot be romanticized. Not all sacrifice was glorious. The Aztec Empire, like many empires, was built on hierarchies, conquest, and domination. Tribute states were forced to supply victims, and festivals like the Panquetzalistli demanded mass offerings. While the spiritual reasoning remained consistent, the political machinery behind it was complex and, at times, ruthless. But even here, the ritual remained encoded with meaning. Sacrifice was both a message to the gods and a demonstration of imperial power. The ability to offer many lives was proof of control, of sacred dominance, of rightful stewardship over the divine. It is this duality that makes the darkest ritual so hard to explain. It was at once beautiful and brutal, sacred and political, voluntary and coerced. It was a mirror of the human condition itself, capable of divine vision, yet shadowed by cruelty. And perhaps that is why it still haunts us. We cannot categorize it neatly. We cannot dismiss it as primitive, nor wholly elevate it as noble. It defies binary thinking, forcing us to dwell in the tension of its contradictions. Today, as we walk through the ruins of Tenochtitlan, as we study the recovered temples beneath the streets of Mexico City, as we listen to the descendants of the Nahua people reclaim their stories, we begin to glimpse the depth of what was lost and what still lives. The rituals are no longer performed with blood, but their echoes survive in ceremonial dances, in altars of maize and candles, in the reverent retelling of old myths. The rhythm remains. The sun still rises. The gods, perhaps, are quieter now, but in the dreams of a people, they are not gone. We must also confront our own discomfort. Why does this ritual disturb us so deeply? Is it the violence, or is it the clarity with which the Aztecs accepted death as part of life? In a world that fears death, avoids it, sterilizes it, the Aztecs looked it in the eye and called it sacred. Perhaps it is not the darkness of their rituals that unsettles us, but the light they shed on our own uncertainties. They believed with terrifying clarity in something greater than themselves. In contrast, our modern age often stumbles in shadows of meaning, seeking without finding, doubting even what we feel. The Aztecs, in all their fire and blood, never doubted. That is their enigma. That is their power. Let us continue to walk this path not with judgment, but with reverence. There is more to uncover, more gods, more myths, more layers of this cosmic labyrinth. And perhaps, in understanding the darkest ritual, we are not descending into shadows, but ascending toward an older light. As we draw closer to the heart of this ancient ritual, it is impossible to ignore the spaces in which it unfolded. Sacred spaces not just of stone and mortar, but of myth and spirit. The architecture of the Aztecs was never merely practical. It was symbolic, designed to reflect and influence the cosmic order. Their great temples, especially the Templo Mayor, were not simply religious buildings. They were sacred mountains, recreations of primordial spaces where gods were born, battles were fought, and creation was renewed. Every level of the pyramid, every carving along its steps, every glyph embedded into its stone told a story. Stories that merged the human world with the divine, making each ritual act not only visible to the people, but visible to the gods. To walk up those steps, especially as a participant in the sacrifice, was to ascend toward destiny, to enter into a cosmic script that had played out for millennia and would continue beyond one's death. In this context, the so-called darkest ritual is not a tale of blood on stone. It is the living theater of eternity, played out under the gaze of a sun that had seen it all before. Beneath the layers of symbolism lies another truth, often overlooked by modern retellings: the intimacy of the experience for those who took part. Much of history views Aztec sacrifice in the plural: mass executions, waves of prisoners, empire-wide spectacles. But each ritual was also deeply personal. The priest, placing his hand on a trembling chest, knew he was not merely enacting a tradition. He was speaking to the gods, with blood. The heart in his hand was not a prop. It was the most sacred offering imaginable. And the people below, watching, weeping, singing, knew that they too were part of this communion. They were not passive observers. They were witnesses, carriers of meaning, guardians of memory. For them, each ceremony reinforced not just religious belief, but cultural identity, ancestral pride, and an unbroken link to the origins of the world. Even more revealing are the fragments of dreams and visions that surround these rites. According to Nahuatl poems and chants, sacrifice was not an ending, but a transformation. The soul of the fallen did not vanish. It took flight. Warriors who died in battle or through sacrifice were believed to join the sun in its journey across the sky, accompanying it in brilliance during the day and returning as hummingbirds or butterflies in the morning light. This imagery is not incidental. It reflects a society that saw life and death not as linear opposites, but as spirals, cycles, eternally entwined. The darkest ritual we still can't explain might, in fact, be a rite of passage, not into destruction, but into renewal. Death was not feared as annihilation, but embraced as a doorway to the stars. The role of women in these rituals, too, adds a layer of complexity that demands attention. While much of the sacrificial practice revolved around male warriors, there were also rituals involving priestesses, midwives, and women dedicated to specific goddesses such as Coyolxauhqui and Totsi. In certain festivals, women were honored with sacred tasks, bathing the idols, preparing sacred meals, singing invocations, or even participating as symbolic representations of fertility and the earth. In a few rare but significant ceremonies, women were chosen for sacrifice as embodiments of goddesses, especially during agricultural festivals where their blood symbolized the life force that fed the soil. These women were not seen as victims in the modern sense, but as vessels of divine femininity. Their sacrifice was believed to fertilize the world, to ensure the continuity of corn, life, and time itself. The power they held, even in their final moments, challenges the notion that Aztec society viewed women solely in passive roles. In death, they were creators. To stand in judgment of these acts is to risk missing their message. While our modern instincts recoil at the blood, the blade, and the flame, the Aztecs saw only the cycle, the necessity, the sacred exchange. They did not sacrifice out of cruelty or conquest alone. They did so because they believed they were holding the universe together with every heartbeat offered. To them, it was a heavy burden, but a noble one. This is what sets their ritual apart from others across history. It was not a spectacle for glory or revenge. It was the lifeblood of their world. Even in their final days, when the Spanish arrived with muskets and steel, the Aztecs did not abandon their rituals. They continued to pray, to offer, to climb the temples, even as the flames of conquest devoured their cities. When the Templo Mayor was finally destroyed, when the altars were broken and the priests slain, something more than stone was lost. An entire cosmology, an entire way of seeing and relating to the universe, was silenced. And yet, silence is not the same as disappearance. Beneath the cathedrals of Mexico City, the ruins of the old temples still breathe. Excavations reveal bones, carvings, ceremonial vessels, all fragments of a faith that was never fully extinguished. In the faces of indigenous dancers, in the whispered stories of elders, in the sacred geometry of Nahua murals, the ritual still glows faintly, defiantly. What remains unexplained, even to this day, is not the how of the ritual, but the why. Why the Aztecs believed so deeply, so unshakably, in the necessity of this practice. Was it trauma inherited from centuries of war and survival? Was it revelation, passed down from shaman to priest? Or was it a wisdom we can no longer comprehend, one rooted in a metaphysical worldview that no longer fits within the logic of modernity? These are questions no excavation can answer. They dwell in the intangible, in the echo of a chant, the arc of a fire-lit blade, the final breath of a warrior who died not as a prisoner, but as an emissary to the gods. The darkest ritual we still can't explain may forever resist full explanation because it was not meant to be explained. It was meant to be experienced, to be believed, and perhaps that is its true power. It reminds us that not all things are made for dissection. Some are meant for reverence, for mystery. The Aztecs knew this. They lived with mystery as a companion, not an enemy. They built their temples not to conquer the unknown, but to commune with it. As we prepare to conclude this journey in our final part, we must ask ourselves, what does it mean to truly understand a ritual that comes from a world so unlike our own? Is it enough to know the details, the sequence, the symbols? Or must we allow it to move us, to challenge us, to disturb and awaken something deeper than analysis? Perhaps the ritual survives because it still speaks, not just of the Aztecs, but of all humanity's struggle to make sense of life, death, and the space between. The ritual is over. The sun has risen. The steps of the Templo Mayor are quiet now, but the silence is not empty. It hums with memory. Beneath every stone in what was once Tenochtitlan, beneath the great cathedral that stands where gods once walked, lies a pulse, a heartbeat too ancient to vanish, too sacred to forget. The darkest ritual we still can't explain has not been erased. It waits, not in blood, but in story, not in sacrifice, but in remembrance. As we close this journey, we are left not with a final answer, but with a deeper understanding of the question itself. For what we have been exploring is not only a ceremony from the past, but a window into a radically different way of being, where life, death, time, and cosmos were not divided, but woven into a single breath. The Spanish tried to erase it. They tried to cast the Aztec ritual into a pit of shame and horror, branding it as paganism, savagery, devilry. But the truth refused to die. Yes, it was brutal. Yes, it was difficult. But it was also beautiful, meaningful, profound. In many ways, it was not a ritual of death at all, but of life. Life as the Aztecs understood it. A flame that must be constantly fed. A dance with the divine. A promise made by the gods and kept by humankind, with each heart offered to the heavens. To modern sensibilities, the images remain stark. Blood cascading down stone, the sun overhead, the crowd below, and the priest above. But to the Aztec eye, this was not horror. This was harmony. And what of the victims, the ones at the center of this ritual? Were they victims at all? To us, perhaps. But to the people of that world, they were heroes, chosen ones, cosmic messengers. Some had lived lavishly before the offering. Others had sung their own funeral songs with pride. In the Aztec language, there are words for this kind of death. Words that mean to flower, to ascend, to return with the sun. Can a ritual be dark when it is filled with so much light from those who believed in it? Can something be horrifying and holy at the same time? The Aztecs believed so, and that belief shaped an empire. There is no denying the cost. Human sacrifice is a reality that cannot be softened. But nor should it be simplified. It was not senseless killing. It was sacrifice in the purest sense, a giving up, a lifting up, an offering. And the gods it was offered to were not distant rulers, but living forces. Huitzilopochtli was the very sun. Tlaloc was every drop of rain. Quetzalcoatl was breath and wind and wisdom. These were not metaphors. They were presence. And the rituals were not performances. They were dialogues, intimate, dangerous, sacred. The darkest ritual was not a relic of fear, but a conduit of faith. What makes it linger in the modern mind is not just its imagery, but its incompleteness. We will never fully grasp it, not through archaeology, nor linguistics, nor reconstruction. The ritual lives in the liminal spaces, in the chants no one recorded, in the meanings no one translated, in the firelight shadows that moved across temple walls long since fallen. And perhaps that is fitting. For the Aztecs themselves embraced the unknown. Their universe was never static, never sterile. It was alive, volatile, filled with gods who bled and demanded blood, who wept, who created and destroyed and created again. They accepted that truth with humility and poetry. To truly understand this ritual, we must surrender the need for full clarity. We must be willing to dwell in awe. We must recognize that mystery is not failure, but invitation. The darkest ritual we still can't explain is an echo of a world that spoke a different language of life, where to sacrifice was not to destroy, but to sustain, where death was not the end, but the breath that made sunrise possible. In that ritual, we find something not only about the Aztecs, but about ourselves. Our hunger for meaning, our fear of pain, our longing for order in a world of chaos. The ritual, in its fire and blood and transcendence, was a mirror, and in it we still see a reflection, not just of history, but of the sacred silence we have forgotten how to hear. And so we end, not in darkness, but in twilight, a space between knowing and unknowing, between past and present. The Aztecs are gone, but not vanished. Their ritual is over, but not forgotten. The gods are quiet, but not absent. Beneath the stone, beyond the veil, something still stirs. And maybe, just maybe, the darkest ritual isn't one we failed to explain, but one we have yet to understand. Before you go, leave a comment. What do you feel when you hear about this ritual? Fear, curiosity, reverence, confusion. What do you believe modern people have lost that ancient civilizations still understood? And if this story spoke to something deep inside you, something ancient and quiet, subscribe and walk with us again on the next journey into forgotten worlds and sacred truths. Because some histories are not over. They are simply waiting to be remembered. The ritual is over. The sun has risen. The steps of the Templo Mayor are quiet now, but the silence is not empty. It hums with memory. Beneath every tree, every stone, in what was once Tenochtitlan, beneath the great cathedral that stands where gods once walked, lies a pulse, a heartbeat too ancient to vanish, too sacred to forget. The darkest ritual we still can't explain has not been erased. It waits, not in blood, but in story, not in sacrifice, but in remembrance. As we close this journey, we are left not with a final answer, but with a deeper understanding of the question itself. For what we have been exploring is not only a ceremony from the past, but a window into a radically different way of being, where life, death, time, and cosmos were not divided, but woven into a single breath. The Spanish tried to erase it. They tried to cast the Aztec ritual into a pit of shame and horror, branding it as paganism, savagery, devilry. But the truth refused to die. Yes, it was brutal. Yes, it was difficult, but it was also beautiful, meaningful, profound. In many ways, it was not a ritual of death at all, but of life. Life as the Aztecs understood it. A flame that must be constantly fed. A dance with the divine. A promise made by the gods and kept by humankind, with each heart offered to the heavens. To modern sensibilities, the images remain stark. Blood cascading down stone, the sun overhead, the crowd below, and the priest above. But to the Aztec eye, this was not horror. This was harmony. And what of the victims, the ones at the center of this ritual? Were they victims at all? To us, perhaps. But to the people of that world, they were heroes, chosen ones, cosmic messengers. Some had lived lavishly before the offering. Others had sung their own funeral songs with pride. In the Aztec language, there are words for this kind of death. Words that mean to flower, to ascend, to return with the sun. Can a ritual be dark when it is filled with so much light from those who believed in it? Can something be horrifying and holy at the same time? The Aztecs believed so, and that belief shaped an empire. There is no denying the cost. Human sacrifice is a reality that cannot be softened, but nor should it be simplified. It was not senseless killing. It was sacrifice in the purest sense, a giving up, a lifting up, an offering. And the gods it was offered to were not distant rulers, but living forces. Huitzilopochtli was the very sun. Tlaloc was every drop of rain. Quetzalcoatl was breath and wind and wisdom. These were not metaphors, they were presence. And the rituals were not performances, they were dialogues, intimate, dangerous, sacred. The darkest ritual was not a relic of fear, but a conduit of faith. What makes it linger in the modern mind is not just its imagery, but its incompleteness. We will never fully grasp it, not through archaeology, nor linguistics, nor reconstruction. The ritual lives in the liminal spaces, in the chants no one recorded, in the meanings no one translated, in the firelight shadows that moved across temple walls long since fallen. And perhaps that is fitting, for the Aztecs themselves embraced the unknown. Their universe was never static, never sterile. It was alive, volatile, filled with gods who bled and demanded blood, who wept, who created and destroyed and created again. They accepted that truth with humility and poetry. To truly understand this ritual, we must surrender the need for full clarity. We must be willing to dwell in awe. We must recognize that mystery is not failure, but invitation. The darkest ritual we still can't explain is an echo of a world that spoke a different language of life, where to sacrifice was not to destroy, but to sustain, where death was not the end, but the breath that made sunrise possible. In that ritual, we find something not only about the Aztecs, but about ourselves, our hunger for meaning, our fear of pain, our longing for order in a world of chaos. The ritual, in its fire and blood and transcendence, was a mirror, and in it, we still see a reflection, not just of history, but of the sacred silence we have forgotten how to hear. And so we end, not in darkness, but in twilight, a space between knowing and unknowing, between past and present. The Aztecs are gone, but not vanished. Their ritual is over, but not forgotten. The gods are quiet, but not absent. Beneath the stone, beyond the veil, something still stirs. And maybe, just maybe, the darkest ritual isn't one we failed to explain. but one we have yet to understand, too. Before you go, leave a comment. What do you feel when you hear about this ritual? Fear, curiosity, reverence, confusion? What do you believe modern people have lost that ancient civilizations still understood? And if this story spoke to something deep inside you, something ancient and quiet, subscribe and walk with us again on the next journey into forgotten worlds and sacred truths. Because some histories are not over. They are simply waiting to be remembered. Thank you for walking with us through the Andes, through history, and through faith. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to check out another interesting video.